Hello, and welcome to the Logistics Management Podcast Series. My name's Jeff Berman. I'm Group News Editor for Logistics Management Magazine, as well as the Peerless Media Supply Chain Group. Today, it's a real pleasure to welcome Rob Handfield back to our podcast. Rob serves as professor at North Carolina State's Poole College of Management and Bank of America Distinguished Professor of Supply Chain Management. Rob also serves as executive director of the Supply Chain Resource Cooperative, which addresses thought leadership and research in the area of supply chain management within the Poole College of Management. And he's also a member of Informs, an international society for practitioners in the fields of operations research, management science, and analytics, where he also serves on its expert panel. Rob, welcome back.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here again, Jeff.
Absolutely. So, Rob, there's been so much going on in the last week, and before that too, obviously, as it relates to supply chain, freight transportation, logistics. But why don't we sort of start at the top? And that simply would be how you sort of are viewing the current state of the supply chain from your perspective.
Yeah, I think right now there's just an extreme amount of chaos and uncertainty in the supply chain at the moment. I don't think anyone was expecting on April 2nd that there would be reciprocal tariffs on 185 countries around the world. Countries that in some cases we don't even do trade with or have positive trade balances.
Right.
And when you look further at it, it just seems unprecedented in terms of really the beginnings of a global trade war.
No question about it. When we look at the tariffs, there's so many moving parts here, and it's seemingly changing by the day, minute, hour, etc. Um, what do you think the initial steps are at this point for shippers to react? Do they kind of wait and see? Do they get cracking on trying to relocate operations, etc.? I mean, there seems like there's a whole bunch of different steps or directions that they could be taking. But what, in your opinion, would be the most efficient or practical approach here?
Well, Jeff, the problem of course, is that there's a lot of moving parts right now, and there's a lot of activity both in Congress as well as in the White House itself that indicates that don't wait too long because it's going to change. And in fact, I think what we're starting to see is that the Trump administration is already getting calls from people in the UK, in Vietnam, in other countries to try to mitigate these trade barriers. And so I think for shippers, I hate to say it, but you kind of have to sit tight at the moment. I
Yeah.
don't think you can move right away and start to, try to take mitigative actions because we don't know what's going to happen next, and it could all change in the next 2 hours. So I would say just sit tight for the moment and let's just kind of see how this is going to play out.
Yeah, it seems like the wise move, especially early on here. Something we talked about a while back when we last had you on, Rob, was just simply uh, the inventory outlook leading up to the tariff actions, and even before that, last fall, with the potential for an East and Gulf Coast port strike, which fortunately did not come to fruition. There was a lot of activity on behalf of importers regarding whether you want to call it front loading, pull forwarding, et
Mhm.
cetera, of imports into the US in order to avoid tariffs, in order to avoid congestion or whatever the situation may have dictated. Um, Given all that's going on now, i- it may be premature on my behalf to say this, but do you think that the whole concept of front loading and pull forwarding is now likely done?
No, I think there's going to be a lot more of that, Jeff. I think, there's been a statement that there may be a pause on the tariffs. People are calling for at least a 60-day or 90-day
Right.
pause on those tariffs. And so I think you're going to see shippers really starting to bring products into the country. In terms of automotive, I think you're going to see electronics, a lot of electronics and phones and so forth being brought in. because really those are the ones that are really going to be hit the hardest.
Okay.
Just as an example, the Apple iPhone, which retails for about $550 with tariffs, would be about $1,000. So, you're going to see a huge demand for iPhones, for televisions, for uh, vehicles. And I think that people are going to start going and buying, making those purchases now while they still can.
Understood. Well put. Um, Things like the pandemic, Rob, and now tariffs, they really continue to sort of put the supply chain in the spotlight as well as subsequently raise its profile. Um, if we were to put all these things together, sort of, how do you sort of think about how the supply chain is viewed at this point over the last 5 years or so, really going back to the onset of the pandemic? It's really gone from something that was kind of assumed happened, you place an order, you get your goods, to now there's a lot to unpack and look at, especially for people that really weren't supply chain focused. What's your take on all that?
Yeah, it's funny you say that, Jeff. I've been teaching and working supply chain management almost 40 years now, and I have never had as much media attention as I have had in the last 5 years.
Sure, sure.
Uh, no one really cared about supply chains, but I think there was a saying, after COVID, oh, blame it on the supply chain, right? So it became a lot. I think it created a lot of awareness and a lot of people. It suddenly raised the issue that, look, we've been relying on cheap goods from overseas, from China, from Asia, and for a long time, and people kind of took that for granted. And COVID, I think, was the first wake up call. I remember talking to someone at the Strategic National Stockpile that's supposed to, keep inventory of critical goods. And this guy told me, I had no idea that all this stuff came from China. I mean, that was the level of awareness of what really global sourcing was, and how critical and how dependent we were on it. So I think the good side is it's created awareness. It started to create more focus on domestic manufacturing, especially for critical goods like semiconductors, like medical products, like drugs. So I think all of those issues are good. However, there's still, a reliance, I think, on China, and we're not going to get away from that just by throwing tariffs at it.
No question about it. And you sort of addressed it, my next question, but I'll just throw it at you anyhow. In terms of just sort of the key lessons learned from these various supply chain disruptions. Obviously, way too early to tell with tariffs, but looking back at the pandemic and some other things, what do you think are sort of the key lessons learned, and also how it highlights the need for supply chain resiliency as well?
Well, I think one of the key lessons learned is we have to, number one, we have to understand who is in our supply chains, right? And not just our tier one distributors, but what's the origin and what is the source of those products? So, for instance, we're seeing a lot of drug shortages of generics. Well, guess what? That's happening because of quality problems at the generic manufacturers in India and China. So understanding, the source of these problems is important. Second, I think there's an increased understanding of really the domino effect in supply chains. A disruption anywhere in the world could potentially impact our demand and our inventory and our products prices here in the United States. So, we are really globally linked, and we've really started to uh, you know gain increased awareness of that. The third lesson, I think, is we're starting to see that localization and nearshoring and friendshoring is becoming a more favorable option. A lot of prior to the tariff announcement, uh, the amount of business that we were doing with Mexico and Canada was really increasing rapidly. And in a sense, our supply chains have become very closely intertwined with Mexico and Canada, and that's a good thing. They're nearby. They speak the same language. They're in the same time zone. there's a lot of benefits to doing that. And of course, when you have shipping that's closer as opposed to across the world, transportation costs are lower, and that can reduce product costs and lower inventory. So I think that's a good thing. And I think we were making great progress in that direction prior to this tariff announcement.
No question about it. So shifting from supply chain resiliency, Rob, to risk management, how do you think the shippers can sort of hedge themselves when it comes to risk management planning, as well as the things they need to be paying the most attention to in the times of need and crisis, if you will?
Well, Jeff, I think, one of the things that I think is really important for people to start thinking about is what I call stress testing their supply chains. And by that, I mean, we have to be able to understand, what are some of the challenges that are occurring and how are those occurring? Now, what that means is, first of all, as I said, understanding where are the problems in your supply chain, understanding where those gaps are and where those vulnerabilities are. And once you do that, then you can start to put scenarios together and say, well, what if these tariffs continue for another year? What if there's blocked imports coming in from China and we don't have anything from China coming in? And that forces you to start to think about alternatives and mitigation strategies. And in some cases, you may find out, if this happens, there's really nothing we can do. And it's okay to know that too.
Yeah, no question about it. Um, Looking at sort of the current state of supply chain and logistics, labor slash employment, Rob, uh, where do things like AI, robotics, and automation fit into all of that? Obviously, AI in particular. I mean, from an editorial perspective, I feel like I get an AI focused press release about twice an hour these days.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, it's really becoming very closely intertwined in people's workflows and reporting as well. And there's some pluses and minuses with that, as you know. I think it has the potential to make us a lot more efficient, particularly in jobs that require repetitive transactions or that require us to be able to access information quickly. The downside is, people can become too reliant on it, and it really in some decisions require human thought and human consideration and context, and that's where I think the weaknesses lie. But in the short term, I think there's a lot of room for improvement in efficiency and productivity, and not just within the manufacturing plants, but within the entire supply chain. There's a lot of white space in many supply chains still that we can close up.
No, for sure. Um, and then it, programs like yours at NC State and many others throughout the country have, supply chain as a career path from an education perspective only continues to grow, prosper, etc. How do you see the evolution, Rob, of supply chain and logistics as a career path, both over the last few years and also moving forward?
Well, it's interesting. We've had our program here at NC State for 25 years, and we're only just beginning to see now. Some of our alumni are taking jobs as chief operating officers, or chief supply chain officers, or even CEOs in some cases. So I think the career opportunities and the upward mobility of supply chain management has really grown. It's not just a dead end job. It's not just the guys in the basement who handle the POs, right? They're doing a lot more now, and you're seeing strategic management being a critical part of that. When you start looking at also the impact of analytics, it's becoming a very analytically focused field, and it's also becoming a very relational field. So it's a great career path for those people who sort of have the emotional IQ to manage teams, to deal with conflict, but also have a strong quantitative background. And we're seeing a lot of young people really interested in the field because it does give you an opportunity. It's not a repetitive job. It's constantly changing, and it can be very exciting.
No, absolutely. You can't help but notice, especially at industry conferences, trade shows, the just the increased presence of academia and young people, for that matter, in programs like yours, attending and from a networking perspective, from a career development perspective, it's really nice to see. Um, a couple more quick ones here, Rob, and something I should have addressed earlier on when we were talking about tariffs. Um, in recent days, there's been a push for bipartisan legislation. In short, it would basically require Congress um, to review and approve most tariffs within 60 days. Um, some reports I saw indicate that the bill probably is not going to pass, but it's it's an encouraging, I guess, from that perspective of the whipsaw effect that everything's going on, that that at least Congress is thinking in that way, or at least some members of Congress. What do you think about that type of legislation, Rob? And maybe what other steps could be taken when we sort of look at the implementation of tariffs? Obviously, last Wednesday, Liberation Day, was was probably above and beyond what most people were bargaining for.
Yeah, no question. I think some level of bipartisan congressional oversight is absolutely required. One of the dangers of the current administration is they're really trying to sort of ignore or bypass, the other branches of government, the legislative branch, of course, and the judicial branch. And you can't, it's a trifecta. You have to have all three branches equally powerful. And when one gets out of balance, which I think is what's happening right now, there's real, it could constitutes there's constitutional crisis that could emerge, and I think we're seeing that right now. I think also that the issue of tariffs is so important to our to everybody, that the average person on the street, to their job, to their trip to the grocery store, that it's impacting people at that level. It's impacting farmers. It's impacting people who rely on Social Security, who rely on Medicare, just for the basics of daily life. And that's when Congress needs to act. I believe, they're hearing from their constituents that they're really unhappy, and so this has to stop. We have to pause and just say, hey, let's regroup and let's think about what we're doing here and what the impacts are going to be.
Yeah, no doubt. Um, and just to wrap up, Rob, obviously tariffs are the dominant conversation here, but what other industry topics, trends, and themes will you be watching or paying attention to over the balance of this year, as well as into next year?
Well, I think the other issue that has come up, obviously, is the issue of mass deportations. Um, I recently spoke to a labor law person who in Texas, and she had a graph that showed the number of jobs that are in that currently illegal migrants or illegal immigrants really carry and pay taxes on, and it's somewhere like up to 50% of people working in hotels and housekeeping.
Hmm.
Uh, it's construction, it's restaurants and food and beverage. Uh, and it's bricklayers. It's things that we rely on every day, janitorial. And if we take and ship these people away, those jobs are going to be unfilled. No one here we're at 3.1% unemployment. No one here wants to take those jobs. And so they're going to be unfilled. And then there's going to be a real problem in terms of service and just basic things that we've come to rely on in terms of services. So I think that's another thing to keep our eyes on. There's a real threat, and a lot of house builders and developers are very, very worried that their source of labor is going to be deported.
Hmm. Yeah, yeah, you're definitely starting to see and read a lot about that. All right, Rob. Well, look, we're at the end of our allotted time for today's podcast recording. So On behalf of Logistics Management Magazine, as well as the Peerless Media Supply Chain Group, I'd like to offer up a big thanks for joining us again. We had you on a few years ago, and I apologize for not getting you back sooner because we've had a great talk.
My pleasure. And again, if anyone's interested in reading further on supply chain issues, I have a blog that I write, and it's at scm.ncsu.edu. That's scm.ncsu.edu. Thanks
And
very
that,
much.
and that is through the your supply chain resource cooperative. Is that right?
That's correct. And our program at NC State, we work with companies. We have student teams working with them on real world problems. So we're putting out some great students right now as well.
That's great to hear. And for those of you listening in, please be sure to give us a follow on Twitter. It's simply at logisticsmgmt. And if you're not currently subscribed to the podcast, please go ahead and do so. It's really easy. Just look for Supply Chain 24/7 wherever you get your podcast. Thanks, everyone, and have a great day, and we'll catch up with you soon.